The cafe was alive with sound. Mid-morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, catching dust motes that danced in lazy arcs across the polished floors. The hiss of espresso machines punctuated conversations. Cups clinked, chairs scraped, laughter bubbled from a corner table where 3 college students argued over who owed what. She moved among it all like a calm current, tray balanced expertly in her hands, steps precise. Her uniform was spotless, her hair tucked neatly behind her ears. Every move was careful, practiced, as if she were dancing through the chaos. Her name tag read Victoria James, small and silver, pinned neatly to her chest, and she carried herself with quiet dignity, though her work went unnoticed by most. And then he came in. He didn't walk. He stormed. The door slammed behind him, drawing the attention of every person in the cafe, though no one dared stare for long. He wore a tailored suit, expensive and sharp, every crease and fold screaming money. A gold watch glinted under the bright lights. His eyes were dangerous, scanning the room like they owned it. People shrank back instinctively, like prey sensing a predator. Even the baristas paused mid-motion. The air seemed heavier, as if it recognized his presence. He planted himself near the center, a commanding figure who didn't just occupy space, but dominated it. Victoria felt a twinge of unease, but she didn't let it show. She moved past him, latte balanced on her hand, heading toward a table at the corner. Her steps were measured, eyes fixed on the cups rather than the man, but fate has a way of ignoring intentions. A misstep, a tiny slip of the tray. Coffee tipped over, spilling in a dark arc across her apron. The cafe froze. Conversation stopped mid-word. The students turned, mouths open. The barista behind the counter paused, a milk pitcher in hand. Time slowed. He laughed. Sharp, cruel. A laugh that cut through the tension like glass shattering on concrete. Watch where you're going, girl. He snapped, voice echoing against the walls. The words landed like a punch to her stomach. She felt heat rise to her cheeks, her ears burning with shame. Her hands shook as she tried to mop the spill with a napkin. Apologies stumbled from her lips, weak and hurried. I am so sorry, sir. I didn't mean. Her words faltered under a stare, a gaze that didn't just look, but penetrated. The world seemed to shrink. The cafe, once alive and bright, became a stage, and she was a lone actor caught in humiliation spotlight. Every eye felt like it pierced her. Every breath seemed heavy with judgment. The customers whispered, silent judgment forming around the space. But no one intervened. She was alone. And then his gaze drifted downward, almost instinctively. His eyes caught the small, silver tag pinned neatly to her chest. The name, the title, the truth she carried with quiet pride. Victoria James, executive assistant to Mr. Blackwell. The laughter stopped mid-choke. His sharp features froze. Eyes wide. Fingers twitching, gripping the edge of the table as if it could anchor him to reality. The air thickened, heavy with disbelief. The cafe didn't breathe for a moment. The music from the speakers seemed distant. The hiss of the espresso machine became white noise. Every person in the room could feel the shift, subtle but undeniable. A name, a single name, changed everything. She wasn't just a waitress. This wasn't a simple accident. And he wasn't just angry anymore. He was panicked, his face flushed, not with the heat of anger, but the cold shock of recognition. You work for him? His voice was unsteady, betraying the sudden collapse of arrogance. Victoria met his gaze. Steady, calm, unshaken. No trace of fear lingered in her eyes. Yes, she said softly, firmly. Executive assistant to Mr. Blackwell. He tried to speak, tried to mask the trembling of his hands, the faltering of his pride, but the words failed him. Every muscle in his body seemed frozen under the weight of revelation. The expensive suit suddenly felt like armor that couldn't protect him. His authority, which moment ago had towered like a fortress, crumbled in an instant. Victoria's heart pounded, but she didn't falter. She straightened her back, adjusted the tray with a careful hand, and began to move again, this time with a quiet confidence that didn't need acknowledgement. Each step was deliberate, controlled, dignified. The coffee spill mattered less now than the silence that surrounded them. Each patron, Each barista, each onlooker felt the tension pulse like electricity through the air. The man who had just humiliated her found himself shrinking under invisible pressure, the kind that only comes from seeing the truth laid bare. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Her name tag glinted in the sunlight, almost mocking in its quiet authority. The power in that small piece of metal was undeniable. It spoke of influence, of control, of a world beyond the small cafe. And he, who had thought himself untouchable, realized how small and vulnerable he was. Victoria's eyes flicked to him. Just once. There was no gloating, no triumph, just calm observation. She had delivered herself with grace, even in a moment of near public humiliation, and now she stood as a reminder. Respect isn't demanded, it's inherent. It's carried quietly in posture, in truth, in the things others overlook until it's too late to ignore. He stumbled back, words catching in his throat. The laughter that had been so sharp and cruel moments ago now stuck like ash in his mouth. Fingers clenched, palms sweating. For the first time, he felt the sting of impotence. The world had shifted in a single heartbeat, and it had been her dignity that caused it. The cafe slowly exhaled. Conversations began again, softer now, cautious, aware of what had happened. But Victoria didn't pause. She moved with grace, serving other customers, her face composed, her body calm. Yet the tension lingered in the corners. Every glance from the millionaire's direction was now tentative, unsure. He had underestimated her, judged her, humiliated her, and all it took was a small tag, a truth displayed to invert the balance. No one else in the cafe might have noticed the subtle power shift, but Victoria knew. She felt in the tilt of his shoulders, the falter in his steps, the way his eyes followed her even as he tried to appear unconcerned. The name tag wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a symbol, a key, a quiet weapon that demanded respect where arrogance had reigned. And in that moment, she didn't just recover from a coffee spill. She reclaimed authority. As the scene faded, one thing was certain. The man who threw coffee had walked in expecting submission, expecting a simple apology, expecting her to shrink under his gaze. But the story had changed in a heartbeat. A single name, a single truth, had shifted everything. And he, who had thought himself untouchable, would never forget it. The cafe continued its morning rhythm. Machines hissed, doors opened and closed, conversations hummed. Yet in that ordinary scene, a quiet revolution had taken place. Victoria had shown that dignity and presence, even in the most humiliating moments, could shift power. And he had learned a lesson about assumption, arrogance, and the invisible strength that walks among us, often unnoticed, until it demands recognition. The cafe seemed to hold its breath. The hum of conversation had quieted to a murmur, a low vibration of curiosity and tension that wrapped around every table like a heavy curtain. Victoria moved with deliberate calm, carrying another tray, her back straight, shoulders squared, every motion precise and controlled. The coffee spill had been forgotten by everyone but him, and yet he couldn't forget. Every ounce of his carefully constructed confidence was cracking, invisible fissures spreading across his composure, visible only to those paying attention. He had come in expecting obedience, submission, a quick apology that would smooth over his anger and let him leave satisfied. Instead, the moment had turned inside out. The laughter, the cruelty, the sharp words, they all faltered under the weight of recognition. He cleared his throat, trying to reclaim some fragment of authority. You work for him? His voice broke halfway, disbelief and fear tangled in every syllable. The words sounded strange even to his own ears, harsh in the quiet room. Victoria paused mid-step. She looked at him, calm, unshaken, eyes steady and knowing. No apology this time. No bowing, no timid smile. Yes, she said softly with quiet authority. And I handle things far more complicated than coffee spills. The cafe felt different now. It wasn't just the physical space that had shifted. The energy in the room had changed. Her words, simple and precise, carried weight. Every glance, every motion, every tilt of her head reminded him that he was no longer the center of power here. For a man who lived on control, who measured the world in dominance and wealth, the sensation was dizzying. The invisible hierarchy, previously unquestioned, had been flipped by something he had overlooked, a name, a role, a person's quiet strength. He waved a hand, dismissive, as if that could erase the shock, as if waving it away could smooth over the fracture in his confidence. "Well, carry on then," he muttered. The words were sharp, forced, brittle in a way that made it impossible to mistake his discomfort. Every sip he took from the untouched cup now tasted bitter, a flavor that had nothing to do with the coffee itself. The taste was humiliation, awareness, the slow recognition that he had misjudged her. He had underestimated someone he assumed was beneath him. Around them, the other staff members and customers watched, riveted. Some were curious, eyes wide with anticipation. Some were jealous, catching glimpses of power they might never experience. Some simply felt the tension in the air, the invisible lines of authority being redrawn, and shivered at the intensity. This wasn't about a spilled latte anymore. It never had been. It was about recognition, about the respect owed to someone whose dignity remained intact even in moments of supposed weakness. Every silent pause, every hesitant glance from him, spoke volumes to those who could read it. Victoria continued her work, each step measured, each gesture graceful. She didn't hurry. She didn't falter. The tray in her hands moved with quiet authority, as if she owned the space, as if the spilled coffee had never occurred at all. But everyone knew it had. The memory lingered, etched into the air between them. She didn't need to say more. The way she carried herself said everything. He, on the other hand, tried to mask the panic in his eyes, tried to smooth over the tremor in his voice, but it was impossible. The arrogance that had entered the cafe just minutes ago had been stripped away, leaving only raw uncertainty. He tried again to speak, to reclaim the upper hand, but every word came out wrong, clipped, forced. I didn't realize. His hands clenched the cup harder. He tried to take another sip, but the liquid burned, bitter and unpalatable, the taste a cruel reminder of his earlier behavior. His usual bravado had evaporated, replaced with something unfamiliar, vulnerability, and he hated it. Victoria's presence was magnetic, commanding without aggression. She moved through the cafe as if she were invisible, yet everyone noticed her. The customers, who had come expecting a typical morning routine, now felt the shift in tension, the electric hum of unseen authority. They leaned forward, whispering quietly, eyes flicking from the millionaire to Victoria and back again. The dynamic had changed. He was no longer untouchable. The quiet, composed woman in the uniform had claimed her space, silently, unassumingly, and yet definitively. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had thought that wealth, power, and force of personality could dominate any room. He had believed that a sharp word, a shove, a demonstration of anger would ensure compliance. But here, in this small cafe, surrounded by the hum of machines and the muted chatter of customers, he had been undone by dignity, by calm confidence, by a single piece of metal pinned to a chest. It was almost laughable if it weren't so humiliating. Her gaze flicked briefly to him as she passed, not in mockery, not in triumph, but in quiet acknowledgement. The glance was enough. He flinched. Every nerve in his body screamed awareness, the kind that only comes when one realizes they miscalculated, misjudged, underestimated. Power is fragile when unearned respect is ignored. He felt in his chest, a pressure that tightened with every second, every measured step she took. The staff who had peeked from behind counters now relaxed, some exchanging looks of awe, some of disbelief. It was a lesson for them, too. Dignity can't be taken, and it can't be mocked into submission. The world might see a uniform, a name tag, a tray of coffee, but true strength lies beyond appearances, in composure, in presence, in the refusal to bow under disrespect. Victoria set down her tray with precision at another table, eyes forward, breathing even, calm. The millionaire watched, every muscle in his body tight, every thought scrambling to reconcile the truth in front of him. He had walked in expecting submission. He had thrown coffee expecting humiliation. And now, he was left with his own vulnerability, forced to reckon with authority that was not dictated by wealth, but by competence, calm and unshakable dignity. The cafe slowly returned to its rhythm. Espresso machines hissed, cups clinked, conversations resumed, but the tension lingered like a shadow. He sipped again from his cup, grimaced, and realized there was no recovery here. The lesson had been delivered. A simple misstep, a spilled drink, a name tag, small, unassuming, yet infinitely powerful. Every detail mattered. Every gesture carried weight. Every moment of calm defiance could shift the balance of power. And as Victoria moved with grace and control, the room watched, silent but attentive. The man who had thrown coffee would not forget the taste of humiliation mingled with disbelief, the way a moment of arrogance had been overturned by quiet authority. It was a moment etched into memory, a reminder that dignity and presence cannot be faked, cannot be bought, and cannot be broken by anger or impatience. Respect, earned or revealed, carries a power far greater than wealth. In the silence between sips and murmurs, the unspoken truth settled like dust. The spilled coffee had been a trigger, but the real force was in the way she held herself, calm, composed, unshaken. He realized that authority isn't just about the titles you hold, the money you earn, or the fear you command. True authority comes from integrity, presence, and the quiet power of self-respect. And in that moment, Victoria James, unnoticed and underestimated, had reminded everyone in the cafe of that truth. The millionaire's face, taut with tension, betrayed him. The room seemed to pulse with anticipation. What would he do next? How would he recover, if at all? The story was far from over. And Victoria, moving to the cafe like a force of calm inevitability, knew the lesson had been delivered. The fallout was just beginning. The cafe had settled into its rhythm again, but the air remained thick with tension. Victoria moved with quiet grace, attended to tables, refilling drinks, wiping crumbs from edges of trays with practiced precision. The spilled coffee was long forgotten by most, yet it lingered like a shadow, a memory of humiliation. He had tried to leave, storming toward the door, muttering about incompetence, his pride wounded but his mind already seeking escape. He had imagined a day would end with the world returning to its normal order, with him towering, untouchable, the authority unquestioned. But the universe had other plans, and Victoria James was no ordinary waitress. She did not rush to follow him. Her movements were calm, deliberate, almost casual, yet every step carried a quiet weight. She approached him at the threshold, tray in one hand, a small folder in the other. He barely noticed at first, his mind still replaying the earlier scene, trying to convince himself that he had been embarrassed, not defeated. Victoria extended the folder with steady hands. "Sir," she said evenly, voice smooth and unwavering, "you asked me to manage your schedule." He looked at her blankly, confusion flickering across his face. Then his eyes dropped to the folder. His sharp features softened into disbelief as he lifted the cover. Inside, every sheet was neat, organized, labeled. There were detailed notes on meetings he had forgotten, key client contacts he had overlooked, urgent decisions that demanded immediate attention. His fingers trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages. The arrogance that had carried him into this cafe, that had allowed him to hurl coffee and humiliation at someone he assumed was beneath him, drained from him like water from a cup. You did all this?" he stammered, voice almost cracking. He tried to mask the panic in his eyes, the sudden realization of how much he had underestimated her. But the truth was undeniable. Every inch of paper, every note, every calculated detail spoke of competence far beyond what he had imagined. This wasn't just diligence. This was mastery. She wasn't just capable, she was indispensable. The room seemed to shrink again. Every customer's gaze lingered, caught in the unspoken tension, sensing the invisible hierarchy being rewritten before their eyes. The staff, previously spectators, felt it too. Respect, which had been invisible, now radiated from her like a light that could not be ignored. The air vibrated with the reversal of fortune. The man who had stormed in with sharp laughter and cruel words was now trembling, facing the quiet power of someone who had refused to be diminished. Victoria held his gaze evenly. There was no triumph in her expression, no gloating, just calm authority. "I make sure nothing falls through the cracks," she said softly. "Every detail matters, sir." Every word was measured, deliberate, infused with the quiet strength of someone who knew her worth and would not apologize for it. His chest tightened. His pride, fragile and brittle, had been cracked in the morning and was now being shattered by the undeniable weight of her competence. He swallowed hard, trying to speak, but his tongue seemed heavy in his mouth. Words faltered. His hands, which had gripped the folder with shock moments ago, now hung limply. He realized painfully that he could not control the situation with anger, intimidation, or wealth. Authority had shifted. Power had found its rightful owner, not in arrogance or money, but in skill, preparation, and quiet dignity. The subtle sounds of cafe, the hiss of the espresso machine, the soft chatter, the scraping of chairs, felt amplified now, like a soundtrack underscoring his fall from assumed supremacy. Each sip of untouched coffee on the table was a bitter reminder of his earlier behavior. His arrogance had carried him to the edge of humiliation, and now it was crumbling completely. He had expected submission. He had expected apology. Instead, he had been confronted with undeniable truth. Victoria James was more than her uniform, more than her title, more than a person to serve or obey. She was strength embodied, and he was powerless to dismiss it. Around them, people leaned in slightly, drawn by the silent drama unfolding. A customer, pretending to read a menu, stole a glance at him, eyes wide. The staff exchanged glances, whispers about passing silently between them. The lesson was clear. Wealth does not command respect. Fear does not ensure compliance. True power lies in competence, in dignity, in the quiet force that refuses to bend. And Victoria radiated that power without aggression, without a single raised voice, simply by being herself. His eyes darted from the folder to her face and back again. Disbelief twisted into something heavier, admiration, grudging at first, then genuine. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He could not dismiss her, could not ignore her, could not go back to pretending she was beneath him. Every ounce of arrogance he had carried in the morning had been stripped away, leaving him raw, exposed, aware of the gap between assumption and reality. Victoria noticed, but she did not gloat. She simply adjusted the tray in her hand and allowed a small, knowing pause. The silence between them was thick, charged, alive. Every heartbeat echoed the reversal that had taken place. He had entered the cafe confident, domineering, cruel, and now, mere hours later, he was reduced to a man facing the undeniable authority of someone he had underestimated. "Thank you," he said finally, voice low, almost a whisper. The words sounded strange, unfamiliar. Gratitude was not his usual currency. Humility, even stranger. He had been confronted with his own flaws, with the limits of arrogance, and forced to acknowledge that competence and dignity could not be bought or bullied. She nodded subtly, her expression composed, almost serene. "It's my responsibility, sir," she replied. "I take it seriously." The customers continued their routines, some unaware of the full gravity of what unfolded, others watching with fascination. Staff returned to their duties, heads held higher, inspired by the display of quiet power. And the millionaire remained rooted to his spot, the weight of his oversight pressing down on him, a lesson delivered in the most unexpected way. In that moment, a truth became undeniable. Respect is earned, authority is felt, and humiliation can be reversed through patience, preparation, and quiet strength. Victoria had turned the tide without confrontation, without anger, without spectacle. She had simply done her job, and in doing so, she had revealed the imbalance of power, the assumptions of superiority, and the folly of underestimating someone based on appearances alone. His hands tightened around the folder again, a reflex born of disbelief and awe. He had tried to dominate with fear, with wealth, with presence. None of it mattered. What mattered was the force of preparation, the calm assertion of capability, the unspoken authority that refused to bow to disrespect. And she had it, every inch, every second, radiating from her like an unmovable truth. The cafe, still humming with its ordinary rhythm, seemed to shrink around him. He felt smaller, diminished, yet oddly enlightened. The lesson, harsh and immediate, would not be forgotten. Victoria James had reclaimed dignity not with confrontation, but with presence, and the shift was irreversible. He would leave this cafe a changed man, aware now that power is not measured by wealth or aggression, but by competence, composure, and integrity. And as she moved away, heading toward another table, the room followed her with subtle, silent recognition. Respect, once invisible, now flowed toward her effortlessly. She had not only survived the morning's humiliation, she had transformed into authority, turning panic into admiration, cruelty into acknowledgement, chaos into order. The turning point had arrived, not in anger or revenge, but in calm precision, quiet strength, and the undeniable truth that some forces cannot be ignored and some people cannot be underestimated. The millionaire's face remained pale, eyes darting toward her as she worked. The tension, heavy and electric, lingered like a storm that had passed but left its mark on every surface, every mind. He had been humbled, he had been awakened, and the moral, though unspoken, was clear to anyone who had witnessed it. Dignity, skill, and quiet authority always leave an imprint, far heavier than wealth, far stronger than fear. The turning point was complete, and yet the story was far from over. The next move, the true test of character, lay ahead, but in this moment the cafe knew. Victoria James had claimed her space, and the man who had underestimated her would never forget it. The lesson had been delivered, sharp and clear, like a bell that refused to be silenced. Evening had fallen over the city, and the cafe, once alive with chatter and clinking cups, had grown quiet. The hum of the espresso machines had dimmed, the bright sunlight replaced by the warm glow of hanging lights. The tables were mostly empty, except for him, sitting alone at a corner table, hands folded around a cold cup of coffee he hadn't touched in minutes. The weight of the day pressed down on him, heavier than any business deal or financial report ever could. The arrogance he had carried in that morning had been stripped away piece by piece, revealed as nothing more than fragile bravado. He stared out the window, watching people pass by, lights flickering in shop windows, the city moving on as if none of what had happened in the cafe mattered. But it had mattered, deeply, for the first time in years. He felt small, vulnerable, exposed. The lesson of the morning, of spilled coffee, of a name tag, of quiet authority, resonated within him like a bell he could not ignore. He picked up his phone, fingers trembling slightly, and dialed. Victoria answered on the first ring, calm, her voice steady, carrying the same quiet authority she had wielded all day. "Sir," she said, as if acknowledging a presence he had only just realized he should respect. He cleared his throat, soft now, careful, hesitant, every ounce of ego stripped away. I underestimated you," he admitted, each word slow, deliberate, almost foreign to him. The weight behind the admission hung in the air, heavy, palpable. She listened quietly, not interrupting, letting the moment stretch, letting him own the truth fully. Her response was measured, knowing, a gentle reminder of the strength she had shown all day. "Power isn't just about wealth," she said. Her voice held no triumph, no mockery, only clarity. "It's about respect, preparation, and humility." Her words settled over him like sunlight breaking through clouds. The lesson, simple but profound, was undeniable. Wealth could buy comfort, influence, even fear, but it could not command respect. Arrogance could silence a room temporarily, but it could not undo competence. And he had seen it firsthand. He nodded slowly, absorbing the truth. Every misstep he had taken that morning, every cruel word, every impatient glance. It was clear now how unnecessary it had been. Coffee, spilled in haste, had been the catalyst, a small, simple accident that had revealed far more than any business confrontation ever could. A single name tag, unassuming yet powerful, had shifted the balance, showing him what he needed to see. Dignity and skill were forces beyond his control. Victoria's quiet pride was unmistakable, though subtle. She had never raised her voice, never demanded recognition, never sought vengeance for the humiliation she had endured. Instead, she had acted with precision, grace, and unwavering self-respect. That, he realized, was true power. And now, as the cafe emptied and the city outside blurred into the gentle hum of evening traffic, he understood what it meant to underestimate someone based on appearances alone. He had treated her as a server, a subordinate, someone beneath notice, and yet she had revealed a reality he could no longer ignore. People are more than the roles they appear to play, and respect is earned, not assumed. The cafe's atmosphere, once tense, now felt serene. Soft light reflected off polished counters, chairs tucked neatly under tables, the faint aroma of coffee lingering in the air. He looked at the empty space around him and felt the enormity of the day settle. He had been humbled, yes, but also awakened. Every hurried decision, every careless glance, every assumption about Victoria had been exposed as short-sighted, even foolish. He had learned that the measure of a person could not be found in their position, in their uniform, or in the way others assumed they should act. True strength was in the way they carried themselves, in their competence, their dignity, and their unwillingness to be diminished. Victoria, on the other end of the line, seemed to sense his reflection. "It's not about winning, sir," she said gently. "It's about understanding what matters. And what matters isn't always visible at first glance." Her words lingered, ringing in his mind. He realized how many times he had overlooked such truths, how many people he had misjudged, how often he had assumed that wealth equaled power, that authority meant command, that fear ensured respect. She had taught him something far greater than any corporate lesson, far more enduring than any business strategy. Humility and competence are forces to be reckoned with, and arrogance blinds those who rely on it. He hung up the phone slowly, letting silence fill the room. The cafe was quiet, almost sacred in its emptiness. He sat alone, letting the realization sink in fully. Victoria James had walked out of that cafe not just with quiet pride, but with her dignity intact, her authority unquestioned, her competence revealed. And he, the millionaire who had stormed in with confidence and entitlement, left with something heavier than embarrassment. He left with understanding. Understanding that people are more than the roles they appear to play, that assumptions can be costly, and that true respect cannot be commanded. It must be seen, acknowledged, and earned. He looked down at the untouched cup of coffee before him. Its warmth had long faded, but its symbolism remained. The spilled coffee, one moment of humiliation, had been the spark that ignited this entire lesson. It had been the smallest detail, unnoticed by most, yet it had unraveled arrogance and revealed truth. He reflected on the morning, the tension, the shift, the reversal. Every glance, every movement of Victoria's had carried meaning he could not dismiss. The day had been a parable in motion, a lesson in presence and integrity, and he had been its unwitting student. When Victoria finally stepped into the cafe later to collect her things, she moved with the same grace, calm, and quiet authority that had defined her all day. Her head was high, her gaze steady, her steps measured. The room, now empty, seemed to bow to her presence, acknowledging the unspoken power she carried. She had not sought revenge, nor recognition, nor approval. She had acted in alignment with her own strength and competence. That was the mark of true dignity, the kind that leaves a lasting impression on anyone fortunate enough to witness it. The millionaire watched her, finally understanding. He had entered the cafe expecting to dominate, to humiliate, to assert control. He had underestimated her, as he had underestimated countless others. And now, as she walked out with quiet pride, he felt a shift within himself, a softening of arrogance, a spark of humility, a profound recognition that respect, true respect, cannot be bought, coerced, or demanded. It must be recognized, earned, and honored. As she disappeared into the evening streets, he remained seated, absorbing the lesson fully. The city outside was indifferent, lights flickering, cars passing, people moving along their paths. Yet inside, in the quiet aftermath, a transformation had occurred. He would never see people in the same way again. He would never mistake a uniform for submission or a title for authority. And he would never forget the simple truth revealed in a cafe. Dignity, resilience, and quiet strength can overturn assumptions, command respect, and teach lessons that wealth and arrogance could never impart. That night, he left the cafe changed. Not because he had lost money or faced public embarrassment, but because he had gained understanding. He had witnessed a quiet heroism, the power of preparation, the strength of composure, and the inevitability of respect earned through competence and dignity. Victoria had delivered a lesson that would stay with him forever. And for the world outside, it was a reminder that even in small, everyday moments, greatness and humanity can shine, often in those we least expect. The spilled coffee, the laughter, the name tag, the folder, it had all led here. A simple moment, unnoticed by many, became a profound story of humility, authority, and moral clarity. The millionaire left with more than embarrassment. He left enlightened. And Victoria walked out with the quiet satisfaction of one who had refused to be diminished, who had shown that true strength lies in dignity, and that life in all its lessons, often comes in the most unassuming forms.